Hello and welcome to Data Fix from IndiaSpend. We are talking about Union Budget 2017. The budget has been termed as something that has recognized the effort of individual taxpayers. There's been a lot of investment allocated to agriculture, rural economy, railways, infrastructure. The questions are, of course, does this translate into consumption and investment? Does it solve some of the problems that we've been looking at thanks to the lag of demonetization that we've been seeing? So I'm joined now by Praveen Chakravarty, Senior Fellow at IDFC Institute, also a founding trustee at IndiaSpend. And Praveen feels that the budget is somewhat confused and is not so clear as it should have been given what we are coming into. So let's ask Praveen why he thinks so and perhaps quiz him a little bit on that.
Sure. Govind, I thought the budget was confused for three reasons. One is the budget acknowledges very weak private investment, acknowledges that there are macro risks with oil prices starting to rise, and global factors now that Donald Trump is the President of the United States. If with this backdrop, one would have expected some policy actions and some reforms to have actually addressed these issues. Instead, the budget was clean, steady, boring. But boring is apparently the new exciting. And that's why I call it confused. I think it's all began with the backdrop to the budget. Post demonetization, we've been somewhat trained to expect some shock and awe from the government. But we don't realize when the shock comes, and we already expected it, it's no longer a shock. Only when it does not come, it's a pleasant surprise. And that's exactly what happened with this budget.
Right. So let me ask you on the first point. So you're saying that there could have been policy action which recognizes or acknowledges what's been happening elsewhere in the world, notably Donald Trump's new executive orders on trade, on H-1B visas, and the general uncertainty on where the global economy is going to go. So what could the finance minister have done?
See, the first thing, when we look back and understand what the problem is, no jobs. The word jobs was mentioned 6 times in the budget speech yesterday. Rural and farmers and poor were mentioned 22 times. Why are there no jobs? There's no private investment. Why is there no private investment? There's no demand for credit, as well as balance sheets are really bad. We've known that the balance sheets have been bad for a long time, right? But we haven't done anything about it. Addressing these issues were really the most important things that he could have done in the budget. What could he have done? Could have taken this head on. Throwing some another 10,000 crores at the problem of bad balance sheets is not the solution. The economic survey that came out just a day before clearly articulated these. Said, why don't we go create an institution, ring fence it, and work out the details of how we're going to solve the bad balance sheet problem. We have nothing for that. With that as the backdrop,
You're saying bad balance sheet of banks right now. But
banks and corporates. Banks and corporates.
The ring fencing is for banks, not for corporates, obviously.
Correct. But the ring fencing is for you create an institution. What the economic survey argued, which is you create what's colloquially known as the bad bank, and then you put in rules in terms of how you would transfer the bad assets, at what price, how would you capitalize these, all of those. And you could potentially capitalize it by doing some sale of assets of public sector enterprises. So those were some of the things that needed to be taken head on, and the budget fall.
Right. So are you saying your major complaint is the absence of direction on private investment?
Having recognized that is the biggest problem.
Right.
Let's be clear. Private investment is at a multi-decadal low.
Right.
Industry credit is at a 60-year low in December. We are not generating enough jobs.
Yeah. So, but what about public investment, which clearly the numbers are pretty significant in this budget, which it may or may not counterbalance the weakness in private investment, but surely will do its bit.
The public investment part, I think the good part was not so much the absolute amount of rupees that goes into public investment. It is where it's going into. The good part was it's going more into capital expenditure, which will create assets, which can have trickle-down impact on job creation, as well as it's for the longer term. So that's the good part. But does that do enough to compensate for the negative demand from private investment? No.
Okay, so let me ask you a flip question then. So why is it then, I mean, since the government, by our collective understanding, does acknowledge this problem of weak private investment, weak balance sheets, both in the private sector as well as in banks, Why did it not, or could it not have actually acted on this?
And that's why I call it confused, because I think it is unclear what they expect from demonetization. Do they expect a bonanza that could be used or not? If demonetization was actually beneficial and it was going to lead to increased tax revenues, then that does not show up in the numbers. If it was bad, then that's not being acknowledged enough. So perhaps that's why I call it confused. Also, let's remember there were fiscal constraints that they had to work with. They had to meet a fiscal deficit target. So they couldn't have gone berserk in spending.
Right.
Also realize that the oil prices are going to go up.
So are you saying in some ways that the House, everyone bet the House, which is on demonetization, or everyone bet demonetization, that demonetization will be the answer to all the problems, and that may or may not have really delivered the way people expected, and therefore all these other things are now not falling into place?
Looks like it. I mean, I can't speak for the government, neither can I kind of conjecture, but it looks like there was some bonanza that was being expected that is not showing up in the numbers when you look at the numbers. And then you have this fiscal deficit target that you have to stick to, which I completely think is the right thing to do. In that context, there was no wriggle room to play around. And that's perhaps where I think they got stuck. But having said that, you still have this thing called public sector enterprises, where sale of that can get you enough,
which the budget acknowledges and says that it will renew efforts to kick off. Yeah.
So it says that it says a lot of things, but we have to wait and see. But clearly, that's the only way you can actually recapitalize and fix the balance sheets and start getting private investment back and start kickstarting the economy again.
Right. So as we run to the end of data fix, so let me ask you. So if you were to put together a prescription of sorts based on what you've just outlined, what would it be? Assuming, let's say, we still had time to undo or do things that may or may not have been outlined in the budget.
So what I would have done is really taken on the jobs issue as the central issue, and then work backwards. The economic survey clearly points out that there were two sectors, textile and leather and footwear, whose employment elasticity is nearly 100 times that of auto and steel. So what could we do to get jobs back? What can we do to get private investment back? And for that, you had to fix balance sheets, and you could have done that only through sale of public sector assets. Otherwise, there was no money to come for fixing balance sheets from anywhere else.
Okay.
So that was really the only place that they could have.
Right. But are you also saying in some ways that very quickly that fixing the balance sheet and then helping companies to actually, let's say, pull in more credit would immediately, or not immediately, but in short time solve the problems that we've outlined here?
It could. I mean, private investment can quickly translate into jobs. There is, and that's where the employment elasticity analysis matters, and clearly the economic survey shows that. So it could have absolutely, had an immediate impact.
Okay. So you've talked about what you didn't like in the budget. What's the one thing you did like?
It's, like I said, it's clean, no funky math, stuck to the fiscal discipline, and fairly modest in assumptions in terms of revenues and expenditure. So overall, it's a very clean and boring budget. But what I argue is we didn't need boring; we needed something bold.
Okay, so Praveen, thank you so much for joining us. Well, that's all we have time on Data Fix this week. We'll be back next week, same time.